July 1947, a remote desert outside Roswell, New Mexico. A rancher discovers strange debris scattered across the landscape. Metallic fragments, unusual materials, objects unlike anything he had seen before. Days later, the United States military announces something extraordinary. The Army Air Field at Roswell has recovered a flying disc. The headline spreads around the world, and then almost immediately, the story changes. The military retracts the statement. Officials now claim the wreckage was only a weather balloon, nothing unusual, nothing extraterrestrial, case closed. But for nearly 80 years, the Roswell incident has refused to disappear because Roswell became more than a crash story. It became the foundation of modern UFO secrecy itself. The moment many people believed, the government realized the phenomenon was real. Information had to be controlled, retrieval programs began, and the architecture of secrecy was born. Tonight, we revisit Roswell through the lens of everything we now know about special access programs, contractor secrecy, crash retrieval allegations, military compartmentalization, and the disclosure era unfolding today. Because Roswell is no longer simply, did aliens crash? Now the question is far more important. Did Roswell create the modern UFO cover up system itself? This is Roswell Revisited. Welcome back to UFO to UAP, the Disclosure Report. I am your host, Matt Tones. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today's episode is titled Roswell Revisited, the crash that created the modern UFO cover-up, 1947 retrieval claims, military secrecy, and the birth of the disclosure era. Remember to subscribe and please share the episode. To understand Roswell, you first need to understand America in 1947. The world had just emerged from World War II, but peace did not bring stability. It brought a new fear, the Cold War. The United States suddenly faced Soviet expansion, nuclear competition, espionage paranoia, and technological uncertainty. And military secrecy exploded. Radar systems advanced rapidly. Rocket technology accelerated. Experimental aircraft programs intensified. Intelligence agencies expanded. And above all else, America feared technological surprise. That fear matters enormously because Roswell occurred at the exact moment the United States entered the modern national security era. The CIA would soon form, nuclear secrecy intensified, black projects expanded, compartmentalization deepened. So when unusual debris appeared outside Roswell, the military was already operating in a mindset of extreme secrecy. The story begins with rancher William Mac Brazel. After storms passed through the Roswell area, Brazel discovered strange wreckage scattered across his property. Accounts vary depending on the source and time period, but descriptions often included metallic foil-like materials, lightweight beams, unusual fragments, and debris that supposedly behaved strangely. Now, importantly, many of the more extraordinary claims emerged decades later. That distinction matters because Roswell evolved over time. The original 1947 story was much smaller. The mythology expanded gradually, but one thing remains historically undeniable. The military initially announced recovery of a flying disc. That headline is real, and that's why Roswell became historic, because official acknowledgement happened first, before the retraction, before the weather balloon explanation, before the narrative reversal. This is the moment everything changed. On July 8th, 1947, the Roswell Army Air Field issued a press release stating they had recovered a flying disc. Not a weather balloon, not debris, a flying disc. Newspapers exploded with the story, and then within hours, senior military officials intervened. Photographs were staged showing weather balloon materials. The narrative changed completely. Officials declared there was no flying saucer, only a misidentified balloon. Now, here's the key issue. Why would trained military personnel at one of the world's most sensitive military bases incorrectly identify a weather balloon as a flying disc? That question became central to decades of suspicion. Critics argue confusion during the flying saucer craze explains the mistake. Supporters of the cover up theory argue the retraction itself proves concealment. And from that moment forward, public trust fractured. Now, we need to discuss the official explanation because decades later, the United States government released detailed reports stating Roswell involved Project Mogul, a classified surveillance balloon program. Project Mogul used high altitude balloon arrays designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. At the time, the project itself was highly classified, meaning military secrecy surrounding the debris was legitimate. And according to government investigations, unusual materials, secrecy, and confusion all stemmed from this classified balloon project. To skeptics of the alien claims, the explanation resolves Roswell. But to believers, serious questions remain because witnesses continued emerging for decades describing unusual objects, military intimidation, retrieval operations, and sometimes even bodies. Again, evidence quality varies dramatically, but the mythology grew stronger over time. This is where Roswell transitions from historical mystery into full cultural mythology, because beginning in the late 1970s and 80s, new witnesses began describing small humanoid bodies, military recovery teams, secret transport operations, and crash retrieval procedures. These accounts transformed Roswell forever. Now it was no longer merely strange debris. Now Roswell allegedly involved non human beings. Critics point out many claims emerged decades after the fact. Memory contamination becomes a major issue. Cultural influence matters. Books, television, movies, conspiracy culture all shaped public perception. And yet, despite these problems, Roswell continued growing. Why? Because the deeper issue wasn't simply bodies, it was secrecy. People increasingly believed if government deception occurred once, what else might be hidden? Roswell became the foundation of modern UFO culture. Before Roswell, flying saucers were mostly strange sightings. After Roswell, people began imagining retrieval programs, hidden technology, underground facilities, reverse engineering, and government concealment. Roswell created the idea that the government knows more than it admits. The concept transformed UFO history permanently, and culturally, it spread everywhere. Books, documentaries, late night radio, Hollywood films, conspiracy theories. Eventually, Roswell became symbolic of hidden truth itself. Even people who knew little about UFOs knew the word Roswell. That's extraordinarily powerful. Few events in modern history achieve that kind of mythological status. Now, here's why Roswell became newly relevant in the modern disclosure era. For decades, Roswell existed mostly in fringe culture, but then modern whistleblower narratives began emerging, and suddenly themes from Roswell reappeared. Retrieval programs, compartmentalized secrecy, contractor involvement, reverse engineering claims, hidden materials. The language changed, but the structure looks strangely familiar. That's why Roswell matters again, not because the original claims were conclusively proven, but because modern allegations unexpectedly revived similar concepts. When David Grush discussed crash retrievals, hidden programs, and compartmentalized access, many people immediately thought Roswell because whether true or false, Roswell became the template for everything that followed. Now, let's explore the deeper theory. What if Roswell forced the government to build a permanent secrecy architecture? Think about the timing. 1947, nuclear fears arising, intelligence systems expanding, Cold War beginning, advanced aerospace competition accelerating. Now imagine hypothetically that genuinely unknown technology was recovered. How would the government respond? Most likely, extreme classification, compartmentalization, scientific isolation, restricted access, contractor involvement. In other words, exactly the kinds of systems later associated with black projects and special access program culture. This is why Roswell remains so central, because believers argue Roswell was not merely a cover up, it was beginning of the cover up system itself. Interestingly, Roswell predates Area 51 mythology. Most people associate UFO secrecy with Nevada, but Roswell actually came first, and over time, the mythology evolved geographically. Roswell became the crash site, Area 51 became the alleged research location. Then came S4 stories, reverse engineering narratives, hidden hangars, exotic propulsion theories. But structurally, all these narratives trace back to Roswell. That's the origin point, the moment people began believing the government possesses recovered technology. Now we arrive at another crucial issue, ridicule. Because after Roswell, UFO discussions increasingly became associated with embarrassment, mockery, dismissal, and over time, that social pressure became powerful. People feared discussing sightings publicly. Military witnesses often stayed silent. Pilots avoided reporting incidents. Why? Because credibility mattered. This is important because many modern disclosure advocates argue ridicule itself became a control mechanism, not necessarily through giant coordinated conspiracies, but through cultural reinforcement. And Roswell played a major role in that process. The story became so controversial that discussing UFOs publicly often carried reputational risk. Now, let's examine the most fascinating possibility. What if Roswell involved not extraterrestrials, but advanced technology misidentified by civilians? This is a critical perspective often overlooked because 1947 was also the dawn of experimental surveillance systems, radar balloons, classified aerospace projects, meaning highly unusual debris could genuinely appear extraordinary, especially to civilians unfamiliar with military technology. That possibility makes Roswell extremely complicated because even if extraterrestrials were not involved, real secrecy still may have existed. And once secrecy enters the story, public suspicion naturally expands. Roswell also revealed something deeper. Information itself had become a battlefield. The military rapidly realized controlling narratives matters, especially during the Cold War, because perception affects national security, public stability, geopolitical competition. And once governments begin managing narratives, trust becomes complicated. This dynamic still exists today. Every modern disclosure debate involves official statements, counterclaims, leaks, ambiguity, skepticism, media framing. Roswell was arguably the first major UFO information war, and perhaps the most important. Most historical events fade. Roswell didn't. Why? because unresolved mystery creates psychological gravity, especially when official stories change, witnesses disagree, secrecy exists, documents remain incomplete. Roswell contains all of those ingredients simultaneously and over generations. The mystery became self sustaining. Each new disclosure wave revived it. Each new whistleblower reopened the questions. Each classified program revealed later in history made people wonder what else remained hidden. That's why Roswell survived when tens of thousands of other UFO stories disappeared. It became symbolic, not just of aliens, but of hidden truth. Today, Roswell exists in a completely different environment than it did decades ago, because now the Pentagon acknowledges UAP encounters, military footage exists, congressional hearings occur, whistleblower protections expanded, pilot publicly testify. This changes public psychology enormously. Roswell no longer sounds as impossible to modern audiences. That doesn't prove the claims, but it changes perception. And that's why Roswell has re entered mainstream discussion. The cultural barrier collapsed. So, after nearly 80 years, what is Roswell really about? Is it about extraterrestrials? Maybe, but perhaps something even deeper is happening. Perhaps Roswell is fundamentally about secrecy, trust, power, and hidden knowledge, because Roswell forced society to confront an uncomfortable possibility. What if governments sometimes conceal information they believe the public should not know? That question extends far beyond UFOs, and maybe that's why Roswell still resonates. Roswell was never just a crash story. It became the birth of modern UFO mythology, the beginning of retrieval narratives, the foundation of disclosure culture, and the symbolic origin of hidden aerospace secrecy. Whether the incident involved Project Mogul, military confusion, classified technology, or something far stranger, Roswell changed history. Because after Roswell, the public began believing the government may know more than it says. And once that belief enters culture, it never fully disappears. Now, nearly 80 years later, we're still asking the same question. What really happened in the desert outside Roswell in 1947? And perhaps even more importantly, what began there? This is UFO to UAP, the Disclosure Report. Thank you again for tuning in. Please share the episode and don't forget to tell your mom.